Hi, this is Steve with OS Nexus, and in this video we're going to set up a scale-out NAS storage configuration with QuantaStor 5. We're going to use the Ceph technology, which is built into QuantaStor, to form a cluster, and then we're going to, within that cluster, set up a scale-out pool of storage. QuantaStor has a unique technology that we call storage grids that lets you combine together multiple QuantaStor boxes together, and then within a grid you can manage multiple clusters. So we could set up 2 or 3 different Ceph clusters and then replicate data between the different clusters. But for the demo today, we're just going to form a grid and then add or essentially create one Ceph cluster within that grid. Today I've got a few virtual machines set up for the demonstration, and I'm logged into the first machine, and we're going to do everything from scratch here. The only thing that we've done so far is we've got QuantaStor installed on each of these systems. We've got some good videos on how to install QuantaStor on bare metal servers or as virtual machines. But once you log in, you'll need to apply a license, and then you'll be exactly at the step that we're at here, where we're going to begin setting things up. So the first thing we need to do on after a clean install of some QuantaStor systems is that we need to go and form the storage grid. We're going to do that by just right-clicking on the first system that we're going to get set up and say create grid, and you can put in any name that you like. I'm just going to use the default name and click OK. So this is now a grid of one server, and I've got 2 other servers I'm going to go add in so that we've got a 3-node configuration for setting up the Ceph cluster. You can add as many nodes as you want, and it will just keep growing in the grid. And as I was mentioning before, you can manage multiple clusters within the grid and set up replication between them and do all kinds of fun things afterwards. But again, we'll get 2 more added to this grid. And you just right-click there and say Add System to Grid, or you can go to the toolbar and say Add System there. You can also add them in groups, so I'm going to put in the IP address range for the next couple of systems. We've got some systems at 10.0.8.94, and actually instead of doing 3 nodes, why don't we do 4 or 5 nodes here? So we'll take 94, 95, and 96. I've got a bunch of VMs set up there. And you put in the password. That's the common password for those other boxes. I'm just using the default password there, which is password. So it's just going to go and add these in. And now these are all gridded up into our QuantaStor grid. So we've got 4 boxes here to work with, and we're going to go form a Ceph cluster inside of this grid of 4 boxes. You can see that these ones are still initializing. It takes a minute for the initialization to complete, and this is just showing us all the network port configuration on these boxes. And as soon as these are done synchronizing across the grid, then we're going to see them, the little green arrow disappear, like we just saw there. So now at this point, we're ready to go do the whole Ceph setup and configuration. And here I want to just show you the Getting Started tab. You can access that through this button in the upper right-hand corner. It's also Getting Started is available right here in the toolbar in the main storage management section. And this basically takes you through all the common workflows. And the one that we're going to work on setting up today is Scale-out NAS, which is one of the most common workflows. So we're just basically going to go through most of these steps here. And the first one is to go set up a Ceph cluster. But rather than going through this, we're just going to go directly into the UI and do these dialogues. But if you forget any of the steps today, just know that you can bring up the Getting Started and then just click here, and this will bring up each of those individual dialogues. So first step is to go create a Ceph cluster. So we're going to create that Ceph cluster across these boxes. You could set up different networks for the front end, for the client access versus the back end communication to the OSDs. We're going to just use the same network for both, but if you wanted to change that around, you just set up the network ports on the QuantaStor systems in that main tab, and you can set up VLANs and bonded ports and all of that right through the UI. And then once that's set up, you can then choose a different back-end interface for the client interface. It's in terms of like Ceph users, Ceph user base, the latest survey was showing about 2/3 are using separate front-end and back-end networks. About 1/3 are using a single network. And I think that actually the one network is becoming a little bit more common as people start adopting 100 gigabit Ethernet because it's fast enough to handle both the front-end and back-end traffic. This is it. So we just click OK, and it's going to go set up the Ceph cluster for us. And that's all there is to creating the cluster. It's going to take a minute here for this to complete because it's going to not only set up Ceph on those 4 boxes, it's going to deploy monitors, Ceph monitors on all those boxes. When you install QuantaStor on a bare metal server or virtual machine, Ceph, in terms of the software, is already pre-installed. All the packages are already in the system. So when QuantaStor is going in and deploying Ceph clusters, it doesn't take very long. It's just configuration and setting up the cluster and key exchanges between the nodes and all of that. So here it's partway through. It's got the first monitor set up. The first monitor takes a little longer, and then the rest of them will be all set up at the same time. And we'll see 3 monitors get set up by default. So I have 4 nodes, so the first 3 will get monitors on them, and the 4th one won't. You can add more monitors at any time and remove monitors just by going to this toolbar and clicking Add Monitor or Remove Monitor. You can add and remove monitors to any nodes. And you can have QuantaStor systems set up that are just dedicated to be a monitor. You don't have to run OSDs on all the different nodes. That's the most common way that we deploy QuantaStor, is that the monitors are on the same nodes as the OSDs, just because the monitors don't require that much CPU horsepower and RAM. But you can certainly dedicate boxes for that. The other bit that we'll be doing today is we'll be setting up the metadata servers, and you can add or remove metadata servers, again, right through here on the UI. This looks good. We've got our monitors up and running here. One little note here is it's complaining that we don't have the domain suffix specified for the servers. That's really a requirement for the object storage, and so I'm going to take a quick little detour here and set that up just so that we don't see that red there. So the nice easy way to go apply the settings for that is say modify grid network settings, and we can go here and just say our internal network domain suffix is osnexus.net. So we'll set that on all these boxes and just click OK. And now we've got that applied across all the systems. In the taskbar, you can see where all these tasks are running anytime we do any activity in the grid and when it's complete. And when the tasks are any completed task, you can just clear just by hitting clear tasks. If it's still running, it'll still show in the taskbar. So I'm just going to clear this stuff out. And we can see this one's still running, and it's working on attaining quorum for the monitors. And the domain suffix stuff we've already applied. We can see these ones are initializing, and this last monitor, or last box, we don't have a monitor on, just the first 3, because we always want that to be odd number of systems so that it can form a quorum. And this will just take another minute for the monitors to finish setup. And so I'll probably pause the video here for just a moment. Okay, we can see that the task is now finished at the bottom. And the first monitor is in the normal healthy state, and it starts to report in all the IP address information and all that. I'll take another moment here for the rest of those to come online. You can see that these are still in the busy initializing state. And then once these are reporting in as healthy, we're going to move on to the next step, which is to configure all of the data devices and journal devices in this next section. So we can actually bring that up now. So we can start going over what this dialog does. So when you go to the data and journal devices section, this is where you can add media to the clusters. If you have different Ceph clusters, you want to choose which Ceph cluster you want to add the media to. And then all these devices that we have here, we have a bunch of 10 gigabyte devices we'll use for our data. And then our journal is 104 gig. I know these are very small devices. I'm using virtual machines here for the demo. Typically what you'd have is some large hard disk drive platter devices that would be more like 10 terabyte or 18 terabyte devices. And then you'd have some SSD storage here. The ratio of that you want to have is where you've got enough flash storage to accelerate the platter, where you have at least 30 gigabytes for the metadata offload, or another 2 gigabytes for the WAL, the write-ahead log, for each OSD, which is going to be typically a hard disk drive, but could also be all flash. If you're using again like if you have 100 hard drives, you're going to multiply that by 32 gigs, and that's going to give you 3.2 terabytes. And you're going to want it mirrored, so you'd get at a minimum enough capacity to have mirrored pairs that collectively provides 3.2 terabytes of flash storage across the cluster. So if it was a 4-node configuration like this, what you might have is a pair of mirrored 800 gigabyte drives per system. In this case, for the demo, we've just got some little 100 gig flash devices. One of the great things about this setup in QuantaStor is that we've put a lot of smarts into this configuration step. All you have to do is click auto config, and it does it all for you. So it's gone and selected all the media that it's detected should be OSDs, and put it into the first box, and then what it sees as a good fit for journal into the second. In this case, the journal devices don't have enough capacity to take and carve out 30 gigabytes out of them for each OSD because they're small. In this case, for the demo, they're only 100 gigabytes apiece. So it automatically reduced the size of the metadata partition or metadata device offload device to 3 gigabytes here, but typically this should be set to 30 or 300. So that's it. So it's selected all of the 10 gig devices for us, all the 104 gigabyte devices to be used as journal. And QuantaStor, behind the scenes, when we go and click OK, you can see here it's going to automatically create RAID 1 mirror pairs out of each of these devices. If this was using hardware RAID 1 to protect the flash media, QuantaStor also detects that, and it would have unchecked this. But typically we'll use software RAID, because software RAID will work across NVMe devices as well. And so it's going to just mirror these up and then carve slices of storage out of that as WAL and MDB metadata database devices for each of these, which will become our OSDs. So I'll just take a quick look here. I think our monitors have long since been all set up and initialized. They're all happy and in the normal state there. So let's go ahead and get our OSDs created. Here you can see the progress of that, and we can go to this section here, and we'll start to see the journal groups get created first. A journal group is basically a LVM VG, a volume group underneath. And by using LVM, Ceph is able to carve off logical chunks to be used as the WAL devices and the metadata DB devices. QuantaStor goes and sets all that up. Here you can see the first OSD that was created. It created a metadata device and a WAL device for it out of this journal group. And QuantaStor has the ability to move these metadata DB devices from one journal group to another. So if you add more flash media and you want to retire these flash devices to replace them, with QuantaStor, it's really easy to go and start migrating these off of the old journal group and onto a new one. QuantaStor uses BlueStore for everything, so there's no use of FileStore. Older versions of QuantaStor supported FileStore. The new ones will discover FileStore-based OSDs, but it always creates new OSDs using BlueStore. And we can see that the first node's got its set of OSDs created. QuantaStor is doing a coordinated task behind the scenes that's going and creating these OSDs in journal groups in a coordinated way across this group of systems. And so you're going to see it parallelize the setup of the remaining nodes. The coordination process sets it up on the first node, and then it parallelizes it across the rest. So that's really helpful on larger configurations. If you're using like the Western Digital Serve 60+8 and you've got 10 or 20 nodes, you're looking at upwards of 600 or 1,200 or potentially a couple of thousand OSDs to set up, and QuantaStor will parallelize all of that. So you can just go get a cup of coffee and come back, and it'll all be set up for you. It's takes a minute for this to finish. We can see that it's initializing a lot of these OSDs right now and getting them set up. So I'm going to pause the video and then I'll come back in a couple minutes and then we'll go set up the scale-out file system, the Scale-out NAS storage pool, and then start using it. Okay, now all of our OSDs are all set up. We'll browse around in there just so you can see that a little with a little bit more detail. After OSDs are set up, they say exists up just like this. Everything's green. You're seeing some heavy utilization because these are such small devices. These are just little 10 gig devices that's being set up as OSDs in this example. But after the OSDs have been added, you'll be able to peer in. One other thing that's really neat that I'm not able to show here today because these are virtual machines, but on physical machines you'd see a panel over here on the right showing you the picture of your server chassis and the layout of the drives in there, because we do correlation all the way from the OSD to the exact drive slot in your hardware. And QuantaStor supports all the major hardware vendors, everything from HP to Western Digital, Dell, Supermicro, AIC, Intel server systems. So you can go and have those systems and their drive slot mapping and be able to very easily replace OSDs, because we'll automatically beacon the drive when it needs to be replaced. You can go in, pull it, put a new one in, and have it rejoin the cluster. So as a new replacement OSD. So yeah, that's kind of a quick little view of the OSD and journal management section. And now we're ready to go set up the scale-out file storage. So in QuantaStor, we call these pools, storage pools. Whether or not you're setting up a S3 zone or a pool for block storage or a pool for file storage, we generally use storage pool as a common term there. In Ceph, there's actually multiple pools that make up object storage and file storage. And so there's a kind of a high-level QuantaStor pool, and then below that, multiple Ceph pools in some cases that are aggregated together to go deliver that. In the case with the file storage, Ceph, we make two pools, one for the metadata and one for the data. And let's go through that. So we're going to click the Create Storage Pool, that's the file storage pool. And it's popped up a little message here saying, hey, you forgot to go set up an metadata server. So let's go do that. Let's say yes. And then let's put the metadata server on 96 and click OK. And that's going to go deploy that. We can see it running right here. And when you deploy new services, they're going to show up in the view here. The first three we put monitors on. This last one, we're going to throw the metadata server there. And we'll see that instance appear here, and you'll see it appear here with a little special icon indicating it's metadata server. We can run multiple metadata servers, and it's a good idea to have two so that you've got some redundancy there. So let's throw another one on 95. So there's our second metadata server. That's going to get spun up here. We'll see the icon appear, and then the metadata server there. You can see the task running. You can see that it's running on node 95. And once that's done, then we'll be all set to go set up our scale-out file pool. So that's done, and we can see it's done initializing, and it's in the normal state. All right, back to here. Now let's do this, and we want to name the file system. We'll just call this pool 1, and we can then choose what type of layout we want for the storage. If you're going to be setting it up for archive, it's generally best to use erasure coding because you're going to get a lot more usable capacity. In the case of 2+1, it's going to be 66% usable. If you do like a 3+1, it would be 75% usable. So you can adjust the number of data and coding chunks here. The coding chunks is a really important factor because this indicates how many systems can be offline simultaneously without interrupting access to the storage. So bigger clusters are better. If you have a 10-node cluster or a 20-node cluster, you'll be able to use a larger stripe size and have more coding chunks and be able to sustain more systems offline at any given time. This is a small cluster. We could do a 3+1 or a 2+1. Let's do a 2+1 since it's a four node cluster. And that takes us to this next bit, which is the scaling factor. Ceph distributes the data evenly across the OSDs, but it has a really neat abstraction layer, the crush map system, where you can have it so that multiple pools can all use the same OSD devices. And the way that that's done is with this layer of abstraction between the pool and the OSD that are called placement groups. And the placement groups has traditionally been kind of a real back of the napkin calculation to go do, and has been somewhat challenging. And we've done our best to really make that as simple as possible. And so what we've boiled it down to is just a scaling factor. You just indicate how much of your cluster do you plan on using for file storage. If it's 50%, set the scaling factor to 50. If you plan on setting this up as purely for file storage and you're not going to be setting up other pools for other things like block and object, just set it to 100. If you get it wrong, that's okay. Ceph is really flexible, and QuantaStor will let you just, you can go to the command line to adjust the placement group count, or you can do that through our UI. But here we're just going to set it to 100 because QuantaStor, in this case, in this demo, we're really focused on just showing the file scale-out NAS capabilities. So let's go ahead and set it to 100. We're going to do a 2+1 erasure coding. I guess one more thing, if you want to do a custom profile for your erasure coding, you can go over here and say create an erasure coding profile, and then you can use that profile here. So you don't have to use the standard erasure 2+1. You can and just kind of adjust the sliders, but if you want to do something really custom, you can do that right through the UI as well. Make a custom profile and then use it, select it here. But here we go. Let's make that pool. This just takes a few seconds. You can see the task running here, and it's going to go create two pools, as I mentioned before. It's going to make a metadata pool that is using a replica 3, so that we've got nice redundancy of all of the metadata. And then for the data portion, where the file data for this file system is going to be stored, it's going to create that erasure coded pool that we requested as 2+1. So the metadata pool, that's created first, and that's initializing, and then we're going to see the data pool appear after that. And you can see the metadata pool, it always gets like an underscore metadata. We're going to see an underscore data pool for the default data pool. And you can add additional data pools to this later on. The CephFS technology is really fantastic in that you can set up many data pools and then have some that might be erasure coded and others that are replica based. So you can start to put files into different pools based off of what kind of performance you need out of them. And in general, you're going to get better performance IOPS wise with replica based, and better throughputs for sequential workloads like archive out of the erasure coded pools. So there our scale out pool is all created. We can start to go use this. So this tab here that we've been working in, the scale out storage configuration, this is where we set up the cluster, add devices to the cluster, and create those scale out pools. But for day-to-day storage management, you're going to do that from the storage management tab. And the pool is going to show up here as well. We can see which systems the OSDs are on, and see some of the correlation of these OSDs to physical devices. Again, I'm setting this up with virtual machines, but if these were with physical boxes, you would see the exact vendor and model of the hard drive and all of that, and you'd see the correlation to the exact chassis. So again, this area under storage pools correlates all the way through down to the metal, so you can see which server chassis and JBOD each individual OSD is located in. From here, we can right-click and say Create Share, or we can go to the Network Shares section and say Create a share there. We'll create a share here, and we'll just call it Share 1. If there were multiple pools and multiple clusters set up with different pools, they would all show up right here. So the grid technology makes it so that you can provision storage from any cluster, any pool within your storage grid. And these could be in different data centers as well. So you can set up hybrid clouds and multi-site grids with multiple Ceph clusters. Again, here we have a real simple cluster with one pool. We'll create a share there called share 1. And just click OK, and we've just provisioned a share. What that's done is it's created a folder inside of the CephFS file system, and QuantaStor makes that share accessible over the SMB protocol. You can also access it over NFS as the entirety of the pool, but you can also access these shares using the CephFS native file system. And for Linux access, we highly recommend using the native CephFS mount options. There's two of them. There's a CephFS kernel mode client and a CephFS Fuse client. And on our wiki pages, I'll take you there next. If you go to this section in the wiki, if you go to wiki.osnexus.com and on the left-hand side, choose Scale-out File Setup with Ceph. This section at the bottom here on client connectivity to Scale-out NAS storage pools allows you to use the native CephFS client to access the storage. And that does a fan out, a lot like PNFS, only better, and will give you better performance than a point-to-point protocol like CIFS and SMB. But the storage is accessible right now on all the different nodes. So let me bring up that machine. Here you can see the share is available on 10.0.8.93, and we can just open up the folder and copy a file in there. So there's a file copied to it, and QuantaStor is going to give you access to that on all the different boxes. So we can go to 93 or 94, and there's the same download file, or 95 and 96. So the storage scale is accessible on all the different boxes at the same time. If you have Active Directory in your environment, if you've got an Active Directory server set up, you can go here and just click Add, Configure Active Directory and enable that, and then put in the credentials and join each QuantaStor system to your Active Directory domain. So you'll need to do that for each of the boxes. That'll create a computer account inside of the Active Directory domain for each of the QuantaStor servers. And after you've done that, that'll give you access to being able to customize access to these shares so that they can be accessed by specific Active Directory users. So in the user section, you just right click here and say modify share and SMB access. That's also available via the toolbar here by clicking modify. You can then assign the ownership of a share to a specific AD user and group. And then the search button here is going to bring up a search system where you can search for different users and groups from your Active Directory and LDAP environment and bring them in and give them access to specific shares. It also supports snapshots. So if you go and right click on a share and say snapshot share, by default, when you create a snapshot, it's going to put a GMT timestamp on that. That's really handy because these snapshots that with the GMT timestamp on them are accessible as previous versions under Windows. And you can also automate making snapshots by using a snapshot schedule. So if you go down here and say, hey, I want to do an auto snapshot of these on the daily basis, you can then schedule to run every day, maybe a couple times per day. That's the default there. Or you can use a timer interval and have it take snapshots every few minutes. And then choose what you want to snapshot. Here we're going to choose that share 1 that we created. And there's one more thing that's really nice in the snapshot schedules, which is long-term retention. This is really important for fighting against ransomware attacks, because if you have like 4 quarterly snapshots, you can roll back almost a year in time and recover that data before the attack took place. So these schedules, we'll just go ahead and create this daily schedule. And if we want it to run immediately, just right-click on it and say Trigger Schedule, and it's going to go make a new snapshot for us immediately. So there we go. There's our second snapshot. And you can see the first snapshot was one that we manually created. The second snapshot is one that is a delta checkpoint that's maintained by that schedule. So the schedule will rotate through and delete older snapshots and create new ones. And again, we had those long-term retention rules, so it's going to keep some of those around. And you can just add more shares to a given schedule, so you can use a schedule to do automatic snapshots of any number of shares and volumes. And those shares and volumes that you put in the schedule can be from different pools as well. So if you have different pools set up on different Ceph clusters on different systems, that's okay. You can throw them all into a schedule and have them snapshot at a specific time of day. That's all I want to cover in the video today. If you have any questions, write us at info@osnexus.com, and thanks for watching.